Thank you. Happy New Year. Welcome to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. My name's Evan. I produce the public program series here. And we're really, really honored. Some of you might know that this library has an incredible archive of recorded sound. One of the large, it's staffed by incredible people, wonderful librarians and archivists that take care of the legacy and history of this country in music and spoken word through multiple kinds of formats, from wire recordings to cylinders to born digital files. This is the place where you can find some pretty amazing stuff. I suspect I don't have to tell that many of you about this place and that particular aspect of it because you're familiar with it. I suspect, in fact, maybe some of you have contributed to that collection yourselves. And so we're very, very honored with that in mind to have the Association of Recorded Sound Collections having their meeting here with us tonight, which is essentially what this is. And we've invited some incredible members of our library community to join in. I think it's going to be pretty fun because we're focusing on Ernie Kovacs. I suspect we've got some Ernie Kovacs fans here. Yeah. And we have two really knowledgeable, charming, fun guys, both a big part of this library family, and that's Ben Modell and Seth Winner. So everybody, welcome Ben and Seth.
Thank you, Evan Leslie. Thank you. There you are. Thanks.
Got to get everything in its proper order.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to this evening. I think that you will really enjoy. For us, whoops, is it there? Hello? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. It's got to be
Come
right.
on,
like
you're
a meeting in
the recorded sound guy. You ought to know. Talk into the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to film school.
No.
Yeah. You're right.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, both of us are what would you call the first post-generation of Kovacs. He died tragically 10 days short of his 42nd birthday in a car crash. I need not go into what had happened. It was really a tragic moment in Hollywood and in television. And Ben, how did you first get interested in Kovacs, and how were you introduced to him?
Well, I think I discovered Kovacs the way most, or not most, but a lot of people who I've met did, which is the television series The Best of Ernie Kovacs, which was produced by John Lolis, who conceived the idea, and friends of mine who know John, who pitched the idea to Edie and went around to every station, every affiliate and PBS affiliate in the country, who basically all said, who? And turned it down, except for the affiliate in Chicago. But that aired in 1977. My parents were Kovacs fans, and they knew of my rabid interest in visual humor. And so when we heard that this was coming on, they made sure I sat down and watched it with them. But I've encountered a lot of people who first discovered Kovacs either through watching those in '77 or through the VHS tapes of those same episodes that were put out and then repackaged on DVD as well. Was that your introduction as well?
That's absolutely the way I learned about him.
Yeah.
There was one special before. In 1968, ABC did a compilation for an hour.
Yeah.
But that was too young. I was too young. I was only 10 at the time. And they did it only because Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In had become such a hit. And George Schlatter's wife, Jolene Brand,
yeah.
who was in Kovacs' shows, Schlatter knew Kovacs, and they decided at ABC to do a retrospective the show, see, this is where Laugh-In came from. But that was it. From 1962 to 68, the next retrospective wasn't until 1977, on the 15th anniversary of his death.
Yeah.
And when you watch him, there are things you're going to see here over 60 years old. They're still as fresh as they were the day that he did them. And remember, we're going to be seeing a lot of clips here from the early days of television, and you're seeing an example of it in that picture to the left, where essentially they're doing TV like the equivalent of a caveman with a stone and a chisel chiseling away at the side of a mountain. Now let me explain something to you about these. These are two unpublished photos. The one on the right was from Life magazine. That's not the one that wound up on the cover after you had done the color, what was it, the silent show,
Yeah.
the color cavalcade in 1957. That's an outtake, which I think was more effective. That should have been on the cover. The other one is very interesting. I gave a presentation at the National ARSC Conference in 2014, and a gentleman came up and he said, I was at one of the Dumont programs. And it was on East 67th Street. I knew where it was. I drove up and walked in. And if you could go to the next slide, please, number 2. Here are more of the photos. Now, you could see how cumbersome everything was. Now, you see these two here where he's doing with the wine? There's something great about this. His advertiser was Gallo Wines. He thought it was absolute rot gut. He refused to drink it on the air, to do anything with it. So he told one of the maintenance guys, bring me an aluminum, metal bucket. He takes one of the bottles on the air, smashes it into the bucket, picks up the end of it, and says, look how beautiful the glass sheens in the light. They use pristine glass in making these bottles. And Gallo Wines came back to him and said, Ernie, we don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. Could I have the third slide, please? And there he is again, and that was the gentleman, David Chichester. He said he was one of 23 passing strangers in the audience that evening. But it gives you an idea of how small, essentially there were like two little sound stages there. So, why? Yeah.
And literally, the tickets said on them, admit one passing stranger. Because the Dumont show was a late night, half-hour, 45-minute show that began at 11:15 or 11:30 p.m. And who's going to be in the studio audience at a live television show before a late night? I mean, they're all inventing late night.
And of course, what followed him when he signed off the Star-Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
He would be the sign-off for the evening.
Yeah.
That's how, have to
That's
remember, it wasn't until almost the early 80s where many stations were still signing off, after a certain time of night. So what he had told me was, he said he liked not having much of an audience. In other words, he liked to work in front of the camera in silence. So if there was laughter, it was because he did something very funny, but they pretty much kept to themselves when they did this. Well, why are we doing this? Because of his innate love for music, especially classical music. Edie Adams had said that when she met him, he kind of had like a book of the month club idea of what music was, whatever they sent you. But because she was a professional Juilliard graduate, she taught him the ins and outs of music, especially classical music. And when he got that bug, he had a very big record collection, from what I understand, of LPs.
Yeah.
And we got a couple of an example to show you. But here we're going to play the first two clips to give you an idea of what he did with music. These are from the NBC evening shows that were the summer replacement for Sid Caesar at the time. The first one is from the very beginning of the first one he did on July 2nd of 1956. And then we're going to go to August 27th, 1956. And for those of you in the second clip, we'll see, on one side you'll see Al Kelly, the great double talker, who says nothing. And the other side is Henry Lasco, who's another one of the great character actors that Ernie used, and he also wound up in a number of episodes of The Twilight Zone and Naked City.
Yeah. Henry Lasco played the landlord character in Wonderful Town that Edie Adams had.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's how they got the connection.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. All right, here we go. 1 and 2, please.
Knock it off, will you? Come on, get this junk out of here. You got some crust. Tell your friend not to be so smart. Hey, the chair. Double replacement. The Ernie Kovacs Show. Ernie Kovacs, Ediad.
You see the confidence that Ernie Kovacs had in the material, whether he knew it was going to work or not. The idea of opening a primetime network show with a shot of 3 people sitting there for about 4 or 5 minutes.
But even
and
then,
something
did you see he had a problem? He couldn't get the gun together.
right.
He's going like this,
Oh, yeah.
live television.
Yeah.
He knows he's got to get that together.
Right.
Otherwise, that joke is going to die.
Yeah. But to just and even the cold open, I don't think a lot of comedians were doing cold opens for their shows, but the one from the first clip that we saw, just this very long, slow, deliberate thing, and
Right.
It's really remarkable. You don't see that with a lot of people.
And that first cut was done on Kinney, which is an overlay of 2 cameras, one on top of another. To think that up, and if you listen to what the musicians are doing, as everything's going on, they're playing through it. That's how good they are.
Yeah. And
They
it's
don't
not
stop at all.
And it's not pre-recorded. It's
Right.
It's absolutely live.
Right.
And they're off somewhere against a black background, matted in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the man to think of that, he actually did that on Dumont. I saw an ad. They did something about that where he did that on Dumont about 1954 into 55.
Yeah.
That was the network that had him when he was riding high, where my friend went to, and then they went out of business. And then NBC hired him and didn't use him for something like 6 months because they said they didn't want him to go back to CBS.
Oh.
So he literally sat dormant until December of 1955. So Shows you how NBC treated him. Now, here's the third treatment of what he did with, with music. This is the opening to the biggest show he ever did at NBC. January 19th, 1957. This was an NBC Color Cavalcade program. It had a lot of meaning for a lot of people that week because on the 14th, Humphrey Bogart died, and on the 16th was Arturo Toscanini's death. In fact, today is the 67th anniversary of his passing. And I have a funny feeling people were tuning into that to try to forget their woes at the time. Ben, do you want to go into a little history of why this program happened?
Oh, well, there's a lot. There's Ernie was almost pretty much out of work at this point. 1956 had been very good to him. He had this big, high-paying contract with NBC, and had his morning show on NBC from 10:30 to 11. And then at some point, he began also doing a radio show on ABC Radio from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So he's doing 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on the radio, spinning records and doing comedy bits, going over doing his half-hour show. Then he got to do this summer replacement show for Caesar's Hour. He's got these 3 shows going all at the same time. And during the summer of '56, one by one, each of the radio show and then the NBC morning show ended. And when the summer replacement show ended, it didn't get picked up, and he had a lot of high hopes for it. And what he got stuck with was basically subbing for Steve Allen, getting his leftovers. Steve Allen was hosting Tonight 5 times a week, but he was also doing a big review show on the weekend. It was just too much for him. So Ernie hosted Tonight 2 nights a week. Right. And that was all he had going on. So when they offered Jerry Lewis a 90-minute weekly color special, Lewis, who had just split with Dean Martin and was preparing to appear at the Palace in a solo show, took the 90-minute show, but just took the first 60 minutes. And I guess Jerry only wanted to do, or figured he could only do the 60, but and the network must have been very happy to have him and figured, oh, we'll get somebody. Nobody wanted to follow Jerry Lewis. Ernie, who had been workshopping some of the material that wound up in the show, said he would do it, being a compulsive gambler and out of work, and did a show where there's pretty much no dialogue. Even the commercials were wordless. And to follow 60 minutes of just full-on Jerry Lewis, 9-year-old.
You mean like, lady?
Yeah,
Nice lady.
It's full throttle Jerry Lewis with 30 minutes of quiet and visual humor, and it was a huge sensation. That's what people were talking about the next day, and it's what got Ernie on the cover of Life magazine and got him a contract with Columbia Pictures. And got him out of doing regular television for a couple of years. But it's a piece of television that was it still holds up. It's his Eugene character, his silent character, in this bizarre, surreal world.
Exactly. And from what I understand, Jack O'Brien, who hated Kovacs, did a review where he went, Jerry Lewis, no, Kovacs, yes.
Yeah.
It was one of the few times he gave him a positive review because he never really liked his work.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now, oh yeah, the story about what happened, that the show never almost happened.
Yeah.
Edie said it. It's in the interviews for the archives of American television. Ben knew Edie. I wish I had. She had a photographic memory, complete recall on everything. And she mentions, it must have been the very beginning of January '57, one of those terrible winter storms. It's 10 degrees outside. And he's over at Rockefeller Center, and he's talking to, one of the lackeys who's going to help him produce this thing. And he says, I need this, 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 and this. We don't have the money for that, Ernie. Well, I need that, and that. We don't have the money. He said, fine, then go put on a goddamn Western out of the archive. And he picked himself up. She said he was so angry, he didn't take his hat, coat, or muffler. He went down in the elevator in his suit and walked 40 blocks from Rockefeller Center to their apartment on Central Park West.
And 91st Street, yeah.
Yeah, in like 10-degree weather. He was so angry. He got there and he started typing up Zumar about the television industry. And later that day, I think she said, they got a call, we'll give you the budget.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
that's a show that almost didn't happen. He was always fighting against these characters. In fact, in the NBC morning series, there are times he looks up at the ceiling. How am I doing, Pat? Referring to Pat Weaver, who was the assistant
Yeah.
president of NBC, who was always breaking his chops. That was Sigourney Weaver's father.
Yeah.
So anyway, here is the opening. By the way, something else. The music you hear, can you tell us what it's from and where?
I've forgotten.
Okay,
what
originally
is.
it was a piece by Gershwin called Rialto Ripples.
Oh, his theme song, which
Right.
never changed throughout his entire
Right,
career.
and who was the one who wrote, who converted
Well,
it?
a guy, somebody named Jack Newland, sort of lifted
Right.
surreptitiously a piece of Gershwin, and then wrote some other parts to it.
Right, called Oriental Blues, and that became his trademark piece. What you're hearing here
Well,
is,
there's nothing bluesy or oriental about it.
yeah.
I've never understood the name of the piece.
and the orchestration you're hearing is Henry Sosnick, who was the staff conductor and arranger at NBC and was also part of Tin Pan Alley back in the 20s, and he came up with that big band jazz version you're hearing
Yeah.
of it. Now we're actually going to see and hear the entire beginning of it with that. Oriental Blues. And this is done on a very primitive way of recording color at the time. So it's kind of grainy, but Ernie's there, but there's a problem at the beginning. The mic, as he starts talking, is not on live television. Fortunately, somebody on Wikipedia gives us the first lines he says, and then the mic kicks in. So let me just read it to you. There's a great deal of conversation that takes place on television. From way in the morning at 6 a.m. to all hours of the night, I thought perhaps you might like to spend a half hour without hearing any dialogue at all. Let's hear let's see clip 3, please.
RCA, world leader in electronics. And RCA, light and sound. World Tool Center Corporation, makers of RCA, World Tool Home Appliances. Oldsmobile. And your Oldsmobile quality viewer to invite you to drive the new rocket engine Oldsmobile. I would like to say something about our titles just before we go, and that is that they are not on film, they're live, and they're all done by a gentleman named John Hoppy. I'd like to show you a little thing that John can do for us with music. In a moment, I'm going to say my last words. Fran Allison, being a woman, will have last words after that. But the theory that they're teaching in most schools throughout the country today is still the old one that this has to do with our not doing dialogue. If in a forest a tree were to fall and there was nothing live to hear it, would there be a sound? So we have a squirrel here, and over there we have a forest. Now I'll just take this cup. Can you hear? Okay. All right, now let's cut away to the forest and let that tree go. See? No sound? Now. That proved it. Brandon, thanks.
And away we
It's another cold open where you have to imagine people who have a color set flipping through the channels and finding that and wondering if there's something wrong with their set. Just these weird
Exactly.
images to start the show with.
Imagine, this is over 62 years ago now, and he was able to do this and come up with that. You can go on Wikipedia and read about John Hoppe. It goes under the title of Mobilux, and there's a photo of he and his wife where essentially it's like banners and they're moving their hands and feet, moving these things around, and that's how they did that opening. We'll hear more from this program in a bit. One of the things about Ernie was he once tried to explain it once or twice about why he likes classical music. And we're going to go to the opening of his famous Kovacs on Music, which was the last special he did for NBC in May of 1959. And there is an incredible video trick he does in there with his suit. Do you care to tell us, Ben, how it's done?
Should
Or
I
shall
tell
we-
them after?
we'll tell them
first. I
afterwards.
don't want to spoil it.
And then we're going to go to the first and second ABC specials, which were from April and May of '61, where Ernie talks about his introduction on his love of music. And then we're going to play something called the Dinner Symphony, which we'll explain later, and we have the artifact to go with it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let us
the
do...
thing to know about with Ernie is that, and Edie would refer to this, what she would call it back of the head comedy, but basically Ernie would get an idea, or in the case with music, he'd hear a piece of music and instantly see something. It would suggest something visually to him, and he would then illustrate it with these choreographed pieces that we'll see from the ABC specials, where he would what you're seeing makes even more sense if you're really familiar with the music. So each thing that you see is it's almost like choreography to go with the music that he's chosen.
Exactly. Okay, let's do clips 4 and 5, please. the back of the head, sweeping.
Tonight's program is a discussion of the appreciation of classical music. It will be on for 1 hour, it will just seem longer. I have never really understood classical music, so I would like to take this hour to explain it to others. Tonight we have this is the one-man band who's going to appear on the show, but he hasn't been able to find an extension cord for his electric cymbal.
Next clip.
Actually, there is a purpose to this program, although it may not seem so to the naked eye, if I may use that expression on television. The inherent love that I have for music is really why I'm here. The money means nothing. The money is nothing, consequently it means nothing. But it is a desire to illustrate music, taking sound to sight, more or less.
That's the beginning of a bit of Ernie's dark humor, which you'll see a bit of. Ben,
And
can
there's
you
also
talk-
something to offend just about everybody in that sketch.
That is true.
Yeah. That's a piece that when the Ernie Kovacs record collection CD was being put together, it was a piece we were trying to figure out what it was. Couldn't figure it out. It's not a very famous piece. I had a recording of it and played it to a guy who was an older gentleman who was a concert pianist, and he said, I don't know what it is, it's terrible. We couldn't figure out what it was, and the CD had to go into production. We didn't know what it was. But I remember rewatching that particular special. At one point, he says, mentions that they're going to do something with music by Karakariev, if I may use that word on television. And that Karakariev, okay. And I came here to the third floor, the recorded sound, and looked through the card catalog. There's this one particular album of a ballet called The Seven Beauties. This is the actual album from the collection here, and I had them put it on, and I had my headphones on, and it went track by track, and at one point I heard that, and I thought, that's it. So it's from this, I mean, this is, I don't think there's a lot of recordings of this, so it's definitely, now we know it's from the Seven Beauties Ballet. It's still not a great piece of music, but it's something that Ernie heard, and that's what he saw, and then he had all these people stage it with, not only with all the costuming and everything, but there's an effect where the image slides back and forth, and there's an overhead camera that had to be placed, and everything that you see is not post-scored. So it had to be choreographed, including the camera work on the cutting, so that it was all done live in one long take and get it right once. This is a relatively simple one. We'll see one later in the evening that is something that would have taken a regular movie studio 2 weeks to shoot, and they shot it in an afternoon.
And it was a commercial.
Oh, I was thinking of a different piece. But
okay.
They're all things when the APC specials were taped, and they would go into these marathon sessions,
yes,
12
right.
hours of shooting, going to triple gold and overtime. But when you realize how much was being shot in that one day, there's no way you could get that in the can in 4 or 5 hours.
It's about a drop of water. That's
Yes,
the one.
yeah, that one is just a masterpiece, I
and
think.
What about the tuxedo?
Well,
You
the
were the one
tuxedo.
that found out about that.
If you watch it enough times, you can hear the sound of lights turning on or switching when Ernie crosses that line. And I had always thought that maybe it was a thing where he had a colored jacket, and then they changed the color of the lighting, which is, I think they did that for Frederick March when he turns it in Jekyll and
Dr.
Hyde.
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, and there's a gentleman named Rick Spector who has a memorabilia and costume business called Stairway to the Stars. He has the Ernie Kovacs and Kapusta Kid puppets, and one of the Percy Dove tonsils, the big folios. And he sent me an email with a photo about a couple years ago of this morning coat that's bright red, and on the inside it said Ernie Kovacs. I said, that's what this is, I think. And Rick got, he had the item of clothing and checked it against this, and it's a perfect match. So it's definitely, he was wearing this bright red morning coat, or whatever you call it, whatever he's wearing, and they had, maybe it was a blue light that changed to something else so that it looked darker and lighter.
Right, because there's absolutely no edit as he
No,
goes across.
no, there's no
Right.
splice. It was shot on tape without a live audience. That whole show.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the genius of the man. Now, here's another aspect of his. This is from May of '61. This was something of what he called his kaleidoscope videos.
Yeah.
And this one is from Deems Taylor's Through the Looking Glass. And you want to explain how he came up with that, Ben?
Well, he had a morning show on a channel, Channel 3 in Philadelphia called WPTZ. It was his first job in television. It was a morning show, a wake-up show that aired from initially 7:30 to 9, and then they branched it out to 7 o'clock because they figured, well, who the heck is watching television? I mean, who has a television? And Ernie was just playing records and trying to make it look interesting, and then they would have breaks for weather and news and stuff like that. But he had to fill time, and he had been on radio for several years prior. And at one point, they asked people, hey, if you're watching, you send us a postcard, figuring they'll get a dozen postcards. And they were deluged with cards. And I thought, oh, people are watching this. So the show went on, and they had to find ways of making something interesting to look at. And they did everything they could on a budget of $1.02. And they took a dime store kaleidoscope and taped it to an frozen orange juice can and stuck that over a lens of the television camera, put on a record, and he would move his fingers around, move the kaleidoscope around in time to the music, which is probably very different from anything else anybody has ever seen on television ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's go to it.
Yeah,
That's
here
clip
it is.
6.
Yeah. And again, Deems Taylor is not, this is probably not a very well-known piece, but he heard it and saw this.
Something in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's from Deems Taylor's Alice in Wonderland suite. It's The White Knight, and it's a piece I think was written in the 40s, and I don't know. Again,
Yeah.
he really went for the really obscure.
Find the record to this.
Yeah.
What LP?
Yeah.
What LP did he take? this
Yeah,
from?
I haven't any idea, but he was really interested in Edie. Once she realized he was hooked on that
Yeah.
sort of stuff, kept feeding him. The wrong note polka from the Golden Age ballet by Shostakovich, which he uses a lot in his later shows, but I've heard recordings. We have audio disc recordings of a lot of the early shows. That's all that survives, and he's using it. The band's playing it in the early '50s. I mean, he's already discovered that and made that part of his musical landscape on his shows. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can thank Edie for that.
Yeah.
And he took to Fish Like Water with it. Well, a drop of water.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a
Yes.
bit.
Right.
Anyway, here are 3 examples of his use of putting music to sight. These are all from the ABC specials. 2 of them are from May. One is the Trepak from the Nutcracker Suite. Another one is something that he was always associated with, one of his great triumphs, his visual visual idea of what the 1812 overture should be. Mm-hmm. And it's with a dancer. Now, what's her name again? Here we go.
It's known,
Yes.
but not by me.
Right. It's Muriel Landers, who was an actress in Hollywood. She was in a famous Twilight Zone episode about a player piano. Mm-hmm. Then when they played the roles, they had their emotions brought to the front. Mm. But she does a wonderful job as a ballerina. And if any of you know what size she was, it's actually very interesting how Ernie makes her look very svelte at the beginning of the clip. Yeah. And then we have, I think, an absolute genius of his, a parody of the Beethoven Fifth where he uses the Bruno Walter recording that had just been issued, which was also from one of the ABC specials. Quite a number of the items he did in those last specials before he died were actually clips that were recycled from Take a Good Look that he liked.
Yeah, the blackout gags were
The
all
blackout,
recycled,
yes. But these, each one of these was done for the specials.
Yeah.
They're not repeats.
Right.
So we're going to do clips 7, 8, and 8A in succession.
with something like the 1812 overture, again, remember, every cut that you see is not a splice. It's a live edit in the control booth. So every element of that, from Muriel Landers on that set to whoever's breaking the celery, to the shot of the eggs, whoever's operating the mechanical monkeys, and everything, it's all live happening in front of cameras, and everybody who's operating all those things has to know the music and how it goes, and that's a well-known piece of music. And some of the other things that Ernie worked with, they must have had to learn the piece on the set, but it's all one long performance take.
Right.
It's really amazing.
One of the ABC crew members said he had to practice that monkey bit for a week. He said it was coming out of my rear end, listening to it and figuring out how to get that to work precisely.
Yeah, I mean, anywhere else you would take it one shot at a time and put it together in an editing room, but that wasn't really possible in a day when you're using 2-inch tape where you literally are splicing with a razor blade, and there's just no way to do that kind of a piece. And the other thing that's wacky about this, you got to remember, these shows aired on Thursday nights once a month at 10:30, following the Untouchables. If you can imagine what that must have been like for the people who were watching the Untouchables. The very first episode, the very special, when it begins, Kovacs opens on a huge television soundstage, and there's dead bodies everywhere, and he's walking through, and he says, sometimes they don't clean up so good after the Untouchables. And he had been stuck with that time slot for about 2 years and probably had been wanting to do that joke forever.
Right, the specials were a replacement for his Take a Good Look that had been canceled in March of '61, that had been on a year and a half.
Yeah.
And we'll get a little bit into that, of how he wound up doing that and what came out of that.
Sure.
Now, let's do two more. This is going to be 8B and 8C. This is the one that Ben was talking about, if you want to explain it now. The Story of a Drop of Water, which is from his next to last special in December of '61.
Yeah, this is the one I think he was the most proud of, even though the introduction that he does to the following piece, the Bartok street scene, on camera he says, well, he got a lot of letters and commenting about it. I think he was looking for something he could repeat from another show to pad out the show. But in an interview he did for the Canadian Broadcasting Company in the summer of '61, he talks at great length about the story of the Drop of Water and what went into making it and how pleased he was with how it came out. It's got to be 7 minutes. And again, remember, you're watching a live performance. Maybe there's 1 or 2 edits in the whole thing, but he's taken a big hunk of the Lieutenant Kijé suite and something else stuck into the middle of it.
And at the end, I think, is Genopody of Satie.
Yeah, there's a little bit of everything, but it's this ballet, and it's really a form of visual choreography, and like I said, including the camera cutting is all he talked about. There's one thing he did with the Firebird suite, where there's a moment in the middle of an operation where there's close-ups of eyes. There's 21 eye blinks, and he said, I'm going like this to the technical director, getting him to change shots, and if there's 20, there's supposed to be 21 eye blinks, and if there's 20, we got to do it all over again.
Yeah.
But it's very specific.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Story of a Drop of Water, when they did the retrospective in 1977, that's why when you saw the 1812 overture, you saw Ernie sitting there. That's from that compilation, because the first 4 programs are not available.
The first 3 specials.
3 or 4?
The first 3.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The first 3, which is that's from. In the compilation, they chopped everything up in 1977. So it's very, as you could see, as he's finishing talking, they're already starting the music into the next segue that they did at the time.
Yeah.
So some of it's a little choppy because of the way they had presented it. But a friend of mine had said, and that's why I did this 20 years ago at ARSC, he said, I remember something in one of the specials, The Story of a Drop of Water. It was not in that compendium. Mm-hmm. The first time I saw it, and I played it at that time, was when Comedy Central had gotten them for meeting in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But even then, in the middle of it, they cut a little bit out of it.
Yeah.
On the DVD that is out now is the first time it's been restored that anyone has seen it since 1961 in its entirety.
Yeah, exactly. And so for that, and especially the Bartok piece, if you know the music really well, especially with the Bartok, because there's not a narrative that you can see, but every move there's
Yeah.
a close-up of a cat that matches a flute line. Camera move will match a piece of a line of music. It's not meant to have a storyline, but it's an illustration of the music itself.
More
A
like-
sound into sight, as Ernie
But
called it.
more like a musical film noir.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's really moody
All
and
right,
wonderful.
so let me just reiterate what we're going to see. We're
Yeah.
going to see the story of the drop of water from his next to last ABC special, which was broadcast on December 12th of '61, and then the street scene with the Bartok Concerto for orchestra music in it, which was from his last ABC special, which was a repeat from an earlier
Yeah,
one.
he had done it on the second one, I think. the
Right, which was
first.
broadcast 10 days after his death.
Yep.
This is the story of a drop of water.
next one.
I've had one great privilege on these shows, and that is in more or less foistering off on you one of the things that is very close to me, and that is good music. I'm particularly bugged on one great composer, Bela Bartok. I think that Bartok writes things that we will comprehend many years from now a great deal more than we do today, the things that he's written. I think possibly the greatest piece of music that Bartok ever wrote was his concerto for orchestra. We did the concerto on one of our programs several months ago, and that single piece of music received more mail than any other. And in more or less response to your enthusiasm, we'd like to do it again for you tonight.
just breathtaking. And as much as there were people, at the end of The Untouchables, go, "Ugh, Kovacs," and went to bed, there were people who were, as we now call it, appointment television, who made sure they were in front of the set. When the first DVD box set of Kovacs shows came out, I was on a guest on the Leonard Lopate show, and I'm in the green room, and the person who had been on the air before me was Alice Cooper. And so Alice Cooper comes into the green room, and they're doing news, and so the producer introduces Alice Cooper, and this is Ben Modell. No, he first meets Alice Cooper. Oh, yes, very nice to meet you. I mean, how many people does he meet? And then they say, oh, this is Ben Modell, who's put together a big box set of Ernie Kovacs material. His eyes lit up. He said, when I was growing up, at 10:30 on Thursday nights, the Cooper household, just everything stopped, and we gathered around the television set, and they never missed Kovacs. So there were also diehard fans watching. There wasn't great ratings, but as long as they sold Dutch Masters cigars.
Yeah, they said the ratings were lousy, but they sold an awful lot of cigars.
This is back when the sponsor bought the airtime, and it was bargain basement prices to get Thursday night at 10:30. And so Ernie could do, he could take 7 minutes of network airtime to do something like this.
Right. Shall we play the audio clip you brought?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Here's something. I mentioned earlier, Ernie had a radio show on ABC from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. For a bunch of months in 1956. And we thought we didn't have any recordings of any kind of these. And there's among the many things that Edie collected and held onto and saved were a large batch of 16-inch audio transcription discs. And I had always been under the impression that they were of the Dumont Show and some of the NBC shows and Kovacs Unlimited on CBS. And we started getting these digitized, and it turned out a bunch of them had labels that said American Broadcasting Company. I went, oh. And so what survives of those, it's not every disc, but our little 3-minute comedy bits he would record or pre-record, or they would record from the air that were either to be played back or whatever. But he did a series, Daniel Vigilant, which was a sort of a spoof of Daniel Boone, something called Space Commuter about R.W. Krimbon and his robot pal Igor. Krimbon is a floor walker on a department store on the moon, and they would travel back and forth. And there was little 3-minute installments. And Martin Crutch, Private Eye. And he would occasionally do silly little spoof commercials in the middle of this. And so in going through some of these as we were preparing the release of the Ernie Kovacs album, the re-release of that, we were looking for bonus tracks. And there is one episode of Daniel Vigilant that winds up being the commercial, the funny commercial, and which wound up on the CD. And so that's what you'll see the record label on screen while we hear this.
Right, so go to the one that says audio track, please.
We'll stay here since there's nothing to look at.
Well, Daniel Vigilant is in quite a spot. From the electrical charge, he now glows in the dark, and the wily Pawnee are having all kinds of fun shooting at him with their bows and arrows. We'll return to Dan's plight in just a moment. But first, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor, the makers of Hot Luddigs, have an announcement of great importance to make. Due to the addition of U-235 to each grain of Hot Luddigs are not a cereal that snap, popple, or crack. Hot Luddigs actually snarl when cream is poured in the bowl. I have here a box of Hot Luddigs, which I'll open. After the handy zippered container is open, I unwrap the airproof, waterproof, radioactive-proof Irish linen inner wrapper. Dial the secret combination on the inner sail. Oops, forgot to turn off the old burglar alarm. Pour the soft kernels of Hot Luddigs into a bowl. Add cream. Come on, the commercial says fresh cream. Come on. There now. And
Simply, awfully hard to do it when she's lying on her side. Pour the cream over the hot noodles. There, just listen to that. The requirements, they're good eating too. And now let's get back to Daniel Vigilant and Marvin Peake. Oops, varmints, guess our commercial took a little longer than we planned. Be sure to join us another day for the next episode of Daniel Vigilant. Bake me some hot cakes and sausage. Make them nice and brown. Hot cakes and sausage. Flip them upside down.
You'd find any excuse to play that record, just to sell copies.
And that's what he started in, radio.
Yeah, yeah, and just to invent this in complete visual picture, just based on sound effects, anything he could come up with.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something I asked you to put together, which
Okay.
was terrific.
Yes.
We're going to play next clip 9A. This has to deal with Ernie and his love of music, but it's a running joke concerning having NBC executives fall through the floor while the program's going on. And the greatest thing about it is I don't have every one of them, but you'll see how they keep a record of it, as each one of them it falls through the floor after the first one. And you'll also get an idea of what a great singer Edie was, a Juilliard graduate. Yeah. Okay, clip 9A.
We would like to introduce tonight, just take this out, I don't want to trip on these things, a network vice president who has come down with us, a gentleman who has done a great deal for the National Broadcasting Company. I hate to impose on your time with anything so serious as this, but I'd like to introduce Vice President of the National Broadcasting Company, Vice President Pelham. Pelham, sir. I would like to introduce the gentleman. Next week we're going to have Freddie and Teicher, those wonderful pianists. The Nairobi Trio will be back, and we hope to have Marilyn with us for a quickie also. NBC Vice President who wanted to run the camera, would you run your camera? He's been so nice to us all here running this little camera.
Two-month joke going on with that. Let's see, what's next? Okay, we're going to go to track 10. We're going to go back to the Color Cavalcade. And this is one of the classic scenes that if you've seen it as a kid or saw it again, you could say, how the hell did he do it? It has to do with liquid coming out of a thermos going at the wrong angle. And of course, what has happened is everything's on a tilt. The camera is on a tilt too, and it's a prism. And if you'll notice something, the image is reversed. All of a sudden, Ernie becomes left-handed. I'm sorry. And why I'm playing this is because of the music he puts on while this is going on. So let's go to just track 10. why it was such a hit after that show. That music at the time was attributed to Haydn. It's actually someone by the name of Hofstetter.
Right.
And it was the famous Serenade in D, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And that became the soundtrack for the commercials Ernie did when he started doing Take a Good Look in the fall of '59. Interesting story about that. The only reason why he did it was he needed money. He was already being chased by IRS. He was spending money like crazy on other things. They were, Edie said they attached everything, including the furniture in the house, if I'm correct. And originally, they wanted George Burns to do it, you know, because Gracie had retired in 1958. And George had suggested Ernie. He says, I'm too old for this. Why don't you use him? And what happened is, when he was given this show, it was his sandbox to play in. Consolidated Cigars said, Ernie, you got a half hour. Create the commercials, and you come up with the clues, which are some of the craziest things that have ever been done. But they also said, make up the commercials. And one of them did win a Clio Award.
The first year they gave him out, yeah.
Gave
The
him out.
conceit of Take a Good Look is one of the many secret guest panel shows, quiz shows that were on the air.
Right.
And the idea is that the panel, there was always Edie Adams and other people like Hans Conried or Carl Reiner or different other, Cesar Romero, were shown video clues. There was supposed to be hints about who the person in the news was, but there's no way you would ever know.
We'll get to one of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
and show what the clue really was.
But Edie
It's
always
crazy.
maintained that Ernie's conceit was that he would shoot these blackout gags as clues and bank them, figuring he could create another show someday out of this where he wouldn't have to do all the work, which is
Right.
He wound up recycling a lot of those gags in the specials a year or two later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let us go to number 11. And Ernie will introduce it concerning his Clio Award.
Yeah. And you'll see the commercial is shown as part of this show to the audience. And so you'll hear audience laughter.
Very, very recently, there was actually 2 commercial awards made by the Committee of First American TV Commercial Festivals and Forums. And we were very, very happy. There are some 1,300 commercials, and 500 top agency men were the award givers on this particular occasion. It was rather a very big one. It is the Oscars to the motion picture industry and the Emmys to television. This is the particular award to the commercial industry. And of all of the cigarette and tobacco commercials of any nature, cigars, etc., the Dutch Master commercial won the first prize and also won the first prize for the most entertaining commercial on TV. And we are... I cannot tell you how much this means. I am just particularly happy and proud, and we'd like to show you now the commercial that won the award.
Next time, step up to finer smoking pleasure with Dutch Masters, the fine cigar.
You'll notice a couple of things. Ben was the one who realized that after watching, those musicians are actually playing. They're not playing to sync to the music, but they are full-fledged musicians.
They either are, or if they're playing to playback, they are matching the recording exactly. They're often one of the things that drives me crazy is often when you see a television commercial and there's somebody playing a musical instrument or especially conducting, they're just waving their hands and they're not paying attention. It doesn't match at all. But they were smoking. They were smoking, but the each musician is playing their part in sync with the music if they weren't actually performing.
And I pointed out to something in Ben. Did anyone else notice something about the pan out when it went to the cigar box? There were 3 cigar bands on the score sitting on right next to the cigar box.
Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
kind of mind the man
Yeah,
had.
and just
Every
again,
little detail.
Yeah, and the confidence to take his time. And this is before Geico made you think that, oh, a commercial could be something you can't figure out what it's going to be for the first 20 seconds. You don't know what the product is. You don't know where this is going. But he, and to play that piece of music, this sort of the slow and steady pacing of visual humor, which I'm sure wound up influencing people like Blake Edwards and other people who
Absolutely.
did visual humor on screen.
Well, I'll tell you what. We have a bunch of Ernie's commercials. We're going to, 5 of them. From 1959 to 61, which was from the Take a Good Look. The first one, I think he should have won a Clio for, because it had an incredible amount of editing done to it. The only way you could tell that they razor-bladed is that the music jumps, and there are notes that are overlapped or clipped. But otherwise, I think it's an absolute masterpiece. So let us go to clip 12, please.
Next time, step up to finer smoking pleasure with Dutch Masters, the fine cigar.
As the holiday season manifests itself, it is more than custom to witness various degrees of inebriety evident among the members of the populace through an over-imbibing of stimulants traditionally in supplement of this time. In other words, everybody's a little bagged. However, not so in this industry. Here is Mr. Ernie Kovacs to present the commercial for Dutch Masters. Next time, step up to finer smoking pleasure with Dutch Masters, the fine cigar.
Nope, there are more. 3 more.
with Dutch Masters, the fine cigar.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Cool weather. Next time, step up to finer smoking pleasure with Dutch Masters, the fine cigar.
See what happens when you get your own sandbox? Well, we're running short, folks, as Ernie used to say. So we're going to go now to the pièce de résistance. We're going to go to track 17. Now, if you remember at the beginning when I said absolutely, finally, the last centenary program, well, the story goes for the NBC evening show, on the first show it was announced the Nairobi Trio will appear. He comes out at the end with a telegram saying they're lost somewhere outside in Trenton, New Jersey.
Hightstown, New Jersey.
They'll be here
It was
next
always
week.
Hightstown, New Jersey.
Next week they say, Nairobi Trio's going to be here. Comes out again with a telegram, we're lost somewhere in the NBC building, we should be here next week. Finally, on July 16th, the third show of the first installment, Bill Wendell gets on, comes up and he says, absolutely, positively, the Nairobi Trio. So without further ado, clip 17, please.
Ernie wanted to make sure people were tuning in.
You know that you've seen our last two shows and have been waiting to see the Nairobi Trio. Unfortunately, Ernie has told you the past shows that they have been unable to make an appearance. But we are very happy to say that they are with us tonight. We went to a great deal of trouble and expense to bring them here, but here they are. The wonders of show business, ladies and gentlemen, the Nairobi Trio.
And that's another instance of where somebody had heard this record and brought it into Ernie,
Yeah.
thinking he might be able to do something with it, played it for him, and he played it again, and 15 minutes later he staged
They
that
staged the whole
first
thing.
time. Yeah.
That's right, it was during the Dumont years.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Evan, how much more time we got? We're running. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to play one more thing to close it out. We're going to go to track 19, Kovacs on music. This is something that everybody always wondered, how the hell did he do it? And we'll tell you afterwards. And just to let you know, in the Kovacs on music, the pianist and conductor that started that was the late Andre Previn. And Louis Jordan appeared during the program as a timpanist.
Yes. Yeah, but it's Andre Previn.
You know,
was
I'll
the
tell you
musical
what, if
director
we
of
can
the
go
show.
over a hair, I'd love to let's do 18 and 19 together, because there's a running joke from the Color Cavalcade. And we get another Nairobi trio in color. going to make it quick. If we can get the next to the last slide from, yeah. This was in Variety. The ABC crew paid for an ad for him a week after he died. That's what they thought of him. And that was concerning the services for Kovacs. And they mentioned a film in there, Pepe, which, no, not it is, Panic Button. I don't know where that came from. But it talks about how his rise was so fast in Hollywood within those short 4.5 years when he arrived in 1958. And they really loved him. From what I understand, half the crew never showed up at the funeral. As they said, they didn't want to see their best friend being buried. And they did anything for him. Anything. That's like I said, with the 1812. Worked on it for a week beforehand to get it right for what he wanted. And if I could have the last slide. All of these people I thank for putting this together, especially Ben. I also want to thank...
Thank you, Seth. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to thank Daniel Cordovez, who was able to find this record for us. And then Andrew Theodoro, who is one of my compatriots downstairs, who forwarded me back the videos I couldn't find. And as it said on his tombstone, nothing in moderation. It's a shame he's gone, but we do have a legacy that's in 3 volumes on DVD to enjoy. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.